You didn't learn how to love as an adult. You learned it before you had language, and you have been speaking that first language ever since. Which means that some of the most important decisions in your relationships are not being made where you think they are. Not in the present moment. Not in the person sitting across from you. Not even in the story you tell yourself about why you feel what you feel. They're being made somewhere older. Somewhere that still interprets closeness according to rules you never consciously agreed to. The difficulty is that those rules do not feel learned. They feel like you. There is a moment, you have had it probably more than once, where you are sitting across from someone and everything is, by any measure, fine. The light is ordinary. The conversation has been easy. The person in front of you has given you no reason. And yet something underneath the surface of you begins to move, quiet and lateral, like a current below still water. A familiar shape of anxiety. Not panic. Not dramatic. Just that particular unease. The one that feels older than the room you're sitting in, older than the relationship, older maybe than anything you can consciously reach. You do not say anything. You have learned not to say anything because you have tried to say it before and it comes out wrong. It sounds like an accusation when it is not an accusation. It sounds like you are unhappy with them when you are not unhappy with them. It sounds like something they did when they didn't do anything. So you sit with it. You perform presence while something in you performs distance. You are there and also somewhere else. And the person across from you, if they are paying attention, may feel faintly the temperature shift. Or they may not. And somehow both possibilities disturb you. Later, alone, you try to locate what happened. You review the conversation. Nothing. You review the moment. Nothing. It was not something they said. It was not something they did or didn't do. It was something that arrived from inside you, using the occasion of closeness as its vehicle. And this is the part that is hardest to sit with. It has happened before. Not with this person specifically. With other people. Every time the closeness reached a certain depth, something else arrived with it. Different person, different circumstances, same interior weather. Same pull away from what you wanted to move toward. You have probably, at some point, concluded that something is wrong with you. That is not quite right. But it is not quite wrong either. And the gap between those two things, between something is broken and something is trying, is where this script lives. What you are living with is not malfunction. It is not evidence of trauma in the dramatic sense that word has come to carry. It is something quieter and more structural. An emotional grammar that was written into you before you could read, and that has been shaping every sentence of your relational life ever since. Not the story you tell about your childhood. Not the narrative. The texture. The way safety felt, or didn't. The specific temperature of attention, of closeness, of being left. These were your first data. And something in your nervous system took meticulous notes. The pattern you keep encountering is not a flaw in your character. It is a sentence you were taught before you knew you were in school. The difficulty is that by the time you are old enough to notice the sentence, you have been speaking it for so long that it sounds like your native tongue. You don't think of it as a learned thing. You think of it as you. The anxiety that arrives when closeness deepens, you call it your anxiety. The impulse to withdraw just as something becomes real, you call it your personality. The way you can be fully present until a certain threshold is crossed, and then suddenly, without volition, you are on the other side of a glass looking in, you call that your limits, your walls, your issues. You have been studying yourself in the vocabulary of character when the real text is much older. And here is where it begins to get uncomfortable. Because you have probably done the work. You are not someone who arrived at this moment without effort. You have read the books. You may have spent years in therapy. You have made different choices than the choices that hurt you, consciously, deliberately. You are not repeating the same relationship. You are in better relationships. And still, the pattern surfaces. Not from the person you chose. From you. From some depth in you that your understanding has not yet reached. The pattern doesn't disappear when you understand it. It disappears when it no longer needs to exist. In 1969, a British psychiatrist named John Bowlby published the first volume of what would become one of the most significant contributions to our understanding of human emotional life. He was not interested in pathology as such. He was interested in something more fundamental. The way human beings form bonds, the biological necessity of those bonds in early life, and what happens psychologically when the nature of those early bonds is uncertain, inconsistent, or interrupted. What he documented across 3 decades of careful work was this. The infant, in relationship with its primary caregiver, develops not just a behavioral pattern but an internal structure, a model. Not a memory exactly, but a template, a set of conscious and/or unconscious rules for the organization of information relevant to attachment, as he described it in his later formulation. And this template, once formed, becomes the lens through which every subsequent intimate relationship is perceived. This is the part that requires translation into the actual texture of lived experience, because stated in the abstract it sounds almost too clean. What Bowlby was documenting was not that children who had difficult childhoods remember those childhoods and carry the memory forward. He was documenting something more fundamental, that the expectation of relationship, what you expect closeness to feel like, what you expect to happen when you need someone, what you expect intimacy to eventually cost, these expectations are built into the nervous system itself, below the level of conscious thought, before you have language to describe them. The template doesn't wait to be called upon. It runs automatically like background software, interpreting relational data in real time and shaping your responses before you've decided what your response should be. Take the moment from earlier in this video. You are sitting across from someone you love. Nothing has happened. The anxiety arrives anyway. What Bowlby's framework lets you see is that something has happened. It's just happening in the template, not in the room. The closeness itself has triggered the model. Some feature of the current situation, the depth of the connection, perhaps, or the specificity of the need, or simply the fact that you are being genuinely seen by someone, matches the parameters under which, early in your life, something uncertain or painful occurred. And the model, doing its job, fires its old warning. It is not irrational. It is a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The design is just very, very old. Think about what that means for a moment, concretely. You are not sabotaging your relationships from some inexplicable self-destructive impulse. You are not broken in ways that make genuine intimacy impossible for you. You are someone whose nervous system learned, in conditions you did not choose and could not evaluate, that closeness past a certain point requires vigilance. That need, expressed too directly, risks something. That the temperature of being truly known by someone is the same temperature as being genuinely exposed. And so it built a response to that temperature. A protective response. A response that once, in a smaller life with fewer resources, may well have been necessary. The response is still here. It is now running in contexts where it is no longer necessary. But the nervous system does not consult you on that distinction. You have been in a relationship for some time now. Or you have been getting close to someone, close enough that the dynamic between you has taken on weight. It means something, this connection, and you both know it. And there was an evening recently, or a few weeks ago, or a month ago that you have been carrying without quite knowing what to do with it. They said something that opened a door. Not a dramatic thing. Something ordinary and precise. An observation about you that was accurate in a way that landed harder than expected, or a moment of tenderness at a time when you were not braced for it. And what you felt was not only warmth. Alongside the warmth, immediately something else. A slight contraction. The sense of a door that was opening from the inside and something in you reaching to close it before it got all the way open. You didn't close it, obviously. You didn't pull back in a way anyone would have noticed. You stayed, you smiled, you responded to what they said with something true. But internally, quietly, you felt yourself step back from the threshold you had been standing at. Not away from them, you were still there, still present. Just slightly behind the glass again. Watching rather than inhabiting. The way you sometimes get in conversations when you're tired. Except you weren't tired. You were afraid. Not afraid of them. Afraid of what happens when people get all the way in. You drove home and you told yourself it was fine, you were just having a moment, everyone has moments, this is what relationships are. And that is true. But it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is that this was not a random moment. It arrived at exactly the point where the connection threatened to stop being manageable and start being real, where it would require you to be truly reachable, not selectively available, not present on your own terms but actually open. And something in you, with a precision that your conscious intention had nothing to do with, pulled slightly back. The withdrawal is never about the person in front of you. It is about the person you learned to be when closeness became dangerous. Carl Jung, working in a register adjacent to but distinct from the clinical framework Bowlby would later develop, was tracking something parallel through the architecture of the unconscious. He observed that the figures of the parents, not as they actually were, but as they were experienced, as they were metabolized in the psyche of the child, do not simply become memories. They become internal figures. The parental imago, he called it. And what he was pointing to here was this. The internal representation of the early caregiver becomes, over time, the template onto which we project our experience of intimacy itself. The people we are drawn to, the way we behave when we are truly close to someone, the fears that arrive when love asks something real of us. These are shaped, profoundly and often invisibly, by the emotional reality of those first figures. What Jung was pointing to, more precisely, was that this is not something you do consciously. The psyche is not, in these early formative years, operating by choice. It is constructing its world, its internal world, its felt sense of what relationships are, from the raw material it has access to. And that raw material is the emotional grammar of those first relationships. The way the primary figures responded to need, to closeness, to absence, to reunion. The specific texture of being held and of being let go of. This becomes the ground-level architecture of how love feels. Taking this further than Jung explicitly stated, what this means for adult life is that you are not simply remembering these figures when you feel the old patterns arise. You are in them. The template is not a description of the past. It is a current experience, running in real time, shaping what you perceive before perception has happened. The person across from you is never only the person across from you. They are also, in some register of your experience, the accumulated weight of everyone whose closeness mattered and was uncertain. This is not a failure of yours. This is how human psychology was designed, to draw on the past to navigate the present. The difficulty arises only when the past that is being drawn on no longer accurately describes the present. When the template, built in conditions of genuine uncertainty or insufficiency, continues to apply its old logic to conditions that have changed. You are with someone different now. You are someone different now. But the model doesn't update automatically. It has to be read first. And here is the psychological twist that the entire preceding analysis has been building toward, and that your understanding has not quite allowed you to reach, even if you have been in therapy for years, even if you know the vocabulary, even if you can describe your attachment style with clinical precision. The pattern survives because you have been trying to eliminate it rather than understand what it is trying to protect. Open that up. Because this is not a restatement of what came before. This is a different claim entirely. When you notice the anxiety arriving in the moment of closeness, what is your response to it? Be honest. Your response is, in some form, to try to manage it, to calm it, to remind yourself that this person is safe, that you are safe, that the past is past, that this is not then. You bring your understanding to bear on the anxiety and you attempt to override it with information. And it doesn't work. Not durably. Not at the level where it would actually stop coming. And you have probably concluded that the problem is insufficient understanding, that if you could just understand the pattern more clearly, trace it back more precisely, name its origin with enough accuracy, it would release its hold. But the pattern is not afraid of your understanding. It predates your understanding. It was built in conditions that could not be narrated or reasoned about, because you did not yet have the equipment for narration or reason. It lives below the floor of language, and you cannot reach it with language alone. What you have been treating as an obstacle to intimacy, this pattern, this recurrent pull toward distance, this familiar shape of anxiety, was not installed in you as an obstacle. It was installed as a solution. A solution to a specific problem that existed with some real force early in your life. The problem of needing someone who was not reliably available. Not necessarily unavailable in dramatic ways. Perhaps inconsistently available. Perhaps available for some of your needs but not others. Perhaps present in body but not in the way that mattered most. The pattern you carry now, the hypervigilance or the withdrawal or the compulsive testing, or the inability to receive care without immediately becoming anxious that it will be withdrawn, is not evidence of damage. It is evidence of intelligence. Your nervous system, working with what it had, built the most sophisticated solution it could find to the problem of attaching to someone uncertain. The problem is not that the solution exists. The problem is that it is still running. Still applying its old logic. Still treating every deep connection as if it might contain the specific threat it was built to protect against. And you can see this, you can see it clearly, and still feel it arrive on schedule. Because understanding the pattern and feeling the pattern originate in different systems. Your cortex can narrate the attachment wound with perfect clarity while your nervous system simultaneously fires its old alarm. These are not in the same conversation. The knowledge doesn't reach the body. And the body is where the pattern lives. Look at what that actually means in practice in a moment. Sit with this. You are someone who has worked on yourself. Who has the vocabulary. Who can trace the thread from the anxious withdrawal of last month back to something that happened 20 or 30 years ago. You have done the work. And you are still in it. Not because you haven't understood enough. Because understanding was never going to be sufficient on its own. Understanding is necessary. It is not enough. And the gap between those two things, between what you understand and what you can actually change, is where the real work begins. What would it mean to actually reach the place where the pattern lives? Not to manage it from above. Not to override it with narration. To actually arrive where it began, in the body, in the felt sense, in the pre-verbal intelligence that built it. The pattern is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that something in you is still trying to be held. What that means, specifically, concretely, in the texture of your lived experience, is this: every time the pattern fires, every time the anxiety arrives in the moment of closeness, every time you feel yourself step behind the glass just as the connection is becoming real, something in you is not failing. Something in you is still reaching. Still reaching for what it didn't fully receive, or received inconsistently, or received in a form that came with conditions attached. The pattern is not a refusal of closeness. It is an incomplete approach to it. It is what reaching looks like when reaching has learned to be afraid of its own arrival. This is what Bowlby's framework arrives at, underneath the clinical language. The internal working model is not simply a record of what happened. It is an ongoing expression of what is still needed. The child who learned that closeness was uncertain did not stop needing closeness. The child made a specific accommodation to the uncertainty and kept reaching. The adult is still making that accommodation. Still reaching. Still accommodating uncertainty that may no longer exist in the environment but that the nervous system has not yet been persuaded has changed. And Jung's parental imago points somewhere adjacent. The figures we loved first, in their inconsistency or their distance or their conditional presence, were also figures we never stopped loving. The patterns we carry from them are not only survival strategies. They are also love letters written in a language that only makes sense inside the original relationship. We keep writing them to people who did not receive the original correspondence. We keep watching them fail to understand the context. And we conclude that we are, fundamentally, people whose love does not land. But this is not what is happening. What is happening is that the map is being applied to territory it was not drawn for. The map is accurate. The territory has changed. What would it mean to read the map differently? Not to discard it. It was drawn with extraordinary care by an intelligence that deserves recognition. But to look at what it is actually pointing toward. Every feature of the pattern, the anxiety, the withdrawal, the hypervigilance, the difficulty receiving care without bracing for its withdrawal, is pointing with extraordinary precision toward something that was needed and not fully received. The pattern is not telling you that you are incapable of love. The pattern is telling you what love still needs to mean in order to feel safe enough to land. That is different information. That is information you can work with. Not in the sense of fixing yourself, of running a program until the bug resolves. But in the sense of reading something that has been written in you for decades and finally understanding what it is actually saying. Not what you have been told it says. Not what the vocabulary of attachment theory says it should say. What it says, in your specific body, in your specific history, in the specific texture of the moments where it arrives most reliably. And then, this is the part that requires a different kind of attention than understanding alone. Beginning to give yourself, slowly and without drama, what you have been waiting for someone else to provide. Not instead of receiving it from others. Not as a substitute for genuine intimacy. But as a foundation from which genuine intimacy becomes possible in a way it has not been before. Because you are no longer only asking another person to resolve something that was installed before they existed. You are meeting it yourself first. You are arriving at the conversation already slightly less starving. Not full. But not empty in a way that makes the other person's presence the only possible source of sustenance. This is not about self-sufficiency as a barrier to connection. This is about something more precise. The pattern runs with such force in part because the need underneath it is still entirely unmet by anything inside you. You have been depending entirely on the external relationship to address an internal condition. And the internal condition predates every external relationship you have ever had. No one person can fully meet a need that was created before them. But you can begin to. What that looks like is not grand. It does not look like a transformation. It looks like something very small happening inside a very specific moment. The moment when the anxiety arrives in the midst of closeness and instead of reaching for your usual response, you pause long enough to ask, what is this actually reaching for? Not to fix it, not to calm it, to hear what it is saying underneath the alarm. The map is not a sentence. The map is an invitation. This is not a call to stop trying to change. It is a call to change direction. You have been fighting the pattern. Managing it, medicating it with understanding, trying to outrun it with better choices. And it has survived all of that. Not because it is stronger than you, but because fighting it was never the right relationship to have with it. You cannot fight your way out of something that is made of your own intelligence. You have to read your way out. And reading is slower than fighting. It requires a different kind of attention. It does not produce results on a schedule. But it produces something fighting cannot. A genuine shift in what the pattern is protecting. Not because the past changes. Because you, finally, understand what the past was for. And once you understand that, Once the pattern's logic becomes visible from inside rather than diagnosed from outside, it begins slowly to release its grip. Not because it has been defeated, because it has been heard, because the part of you that built it has been finally seen. You are not someone who cannot love. You are someone who learned to love in conditions that taught you to be afraid of what you most needed. The person who leaves this video is not someone who has solved the pattern. There is no solving. There is only reading. The person who leaves this video is someone who can see, perhaps for the first time with any real precision, that the pattern running beneath their relational life is not an obstacle to intimacy but a map toward the specific shape of what their intimacy needs to grow into. A map drawn in the handwriting of who they were before they knew they were anyone. Precise, loyal, and quietly waiting to be understood rather than overcome. You already know what love was supposed to feel like. You knew it before you could speak. The work, the real work, the one that comes after the understanding, is learning to recognize it when it arrives and to stay. The patterns that survive every attempt to change them are usually the ones we haven't yet understood, only fought. This channel exists for the understanding that comes before the fighting stops being necessary. If that's the work you're doing, stay.